When I look back at why Resident Evil left such a profound impact on me, it wasn't the gameplay, the zombies, the horrifying creature encounters, or Barry Burton's delightful charm.
You were almost a Jill sandwich.
It was how each individual room was meticulously framed. Fixed camera angles have had a powerful influence on how we have perceived many early 3D horror games. It was that sense of visual limitation that effectively reinforced our vulnerability as players. Having just approached its 20th anniversary, I think it's worth looking back at just how Resident Evil helped shape how we understand video game cinematography. It's worth bearing in mind that Resident Evil didn't establish the fixed angle composition that early survival horror adopted. Alone in the Dark did it 4 years earlier to arguably superior effect, but that's a completely different topic for a completely different video. Resident Evil stood its own ground, much like Silent Hill, which preceded it 3 years later and built upon the methods even further. Like Alone in the Dark, which borrowed elements from even earlier horror games such as Haunted House for the Atari 2600, Resident Evil developed on the premise of a top-down experience where the player was separated from the character's perspective, but still actively involved in the action. Originally conceived as a remake to Capcom's video game adaptation of the Japanese psychological horror Sweet House, it's not hard to see the parallels between both games, but where the latter truly shined was how it composed its setting with atmospheric and emotional effect. The game, which predominantly takes place in tight corridors separated by relatively spacious rooms, uses high angles and wide long shots to maintain constant tension. For example, just look at how the game introduces its first gameplay scenario. It opens with an extreme high-angle long shot that immediately makes the characters feel small and weak. The way the camera lingers in the corner of most rooms helps establish an unorthodox sense of scale that makes each room oddly uncomfortable given the extreme distance the player feels from the character. It suggests a lack of safety and emotional distance that makes them feel trapped and isolated in such an overpowering environment. In the first room, the camera never focuses on the characters. It broadly calls attention to every aspect of the room, which further emphasizes the eerie atmosphere. There is no real depth of field. The game relies heavily on the use of deep focus. This was a technique that was used to keep the foreground, midground, and background in focus, whether it be for stylistic or emotional effect. In this case, it encourages our eyes to actively scan each area with suspicion. It calls attention to itself. It makes us cautious about our environment. When we encounter our first corridor, the camera lurks above the player, then behind them, creating an uneasy level of tension that inevitably permeates throughout the rest of the game. These two shots effectively summarize the importance of the framing. The high angle makes the player feel small and feeble, and the long shot of the hallway gives us a more voyeuristic impression that something is stalking the player from behind. Then, of course, the zombie's reveal gives us an appropriate climax to the tension building with haunting close-up composition. The camera swiftly tracks in from behind as if to convey a distressed concern for what is happening, but by not showing us the physical action leaves us in obscurity, and thus intensifies the dramatic impact of the reveal. The cut to a close-up of the zombie turning accentuates the suspense of the scene to pure horror, and throws the player into immediate panic. The hazy motion effect always enhanced the shot for me, as it creates the emotional effect of being so fazed and surprised by the horrific sight. But interestingly, the camera work also plays into the first combat scenario. If you naturally move slightly back, the shot changes to this, blocking the zombie from your eye line and thus increasing the sense of panic. Even running to this angle makes little difference, as the zombie is now entering from the bottom frame and your view is still obstructed. The entire composition of this scene just makes the game feel even more claustrophobic as a result, and further reinforces that feeling of vulnerability. There's even the anticipation that this scene creates, as the crows hold your attention. Their menacing presence perpetuates the room, and makes you anxious about making a decision that could cause the crows to attack. Considering the camera is framed from the crow's perspective, the character becomes increasingly more exposed and insecure, as they are in this moment literally being watched. In fact, this scene echoes Alfred Hitchcock's The Birds, where you find yourself holding your breath, awaiting the bird's inevitable attack. One of the best jump scares ever executed, in my opinion, happens in this moment. The high-key lighting, the camera framed on ground level with the character, and the simplicity of the colours makes the room appear warm and peaceful, welcoming the player and easing the tension. But in the second shot, the camera lingers close to the window without calling immediate attention to it, given that it's shy within the frame. When the dog jumps into the scene, the dynamic of the tone changes. Notice that the third shot switches to a high angle, bringing the player back into a position of vulnerability. Instead, the second window is directly out of frame, giving us little time to react to the second dog that ambushes the character from the front. Then lastly, the final shot returns to a high angle, stalking the player from behind. Notice how the camera framing changes throughout the scene to work in tandem with the drama to achieve a heightened emotional effect. But if you want to take the dramatic framing even further, just watch how the hunter is revealed. The use of the creature's POV escalates the mood, as the speed and determination of the camera changes the pace of the game away from the slow static shots we've grown accustomed to. Showing us the perspective of the killer isn't uncommon. Films like Halloween and Black Christmas dated in the early 70s, which added a dynamic to the threat that the enemy poses. Then lastly, of course, we have the opening door transition shot. Definitively iconic, opening any door in Resident Evil is like a major event. Before 3D games, entering a new room was like entering an entirely new level, as the player would never know what would be on the other side of the door. When Resident Evil came along, by transitioning to a POV, the player was literally thrown into the shoes of the character as they venture into an ominous black void, completely uncertain as to what will be on the other side. It effectively changed how we perceive the importance of entering a new room in a horror game, as it plays very much on the fear and hesitation that the character is going through, the caution that something is lurking beyond. Now, I personally always find the stairs to be much more menacing, as the camera is looking down, caught off guard, and each step feels like an eternity. Resident Evil helped start a new age in horror video games, and its cinematography played a substantial part in how it induced fear into the player, such as the feeling of confinement brought on by the static shots that limit your line of sight, and the deep focus long shots that create an uneasy feeling that something isn't right. It reminds me very much of Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho, and it's not difficult to draw parallels between both Hitchcock's work and what cinematic techniques they employed into Resident Evil. The game works on a level of simplicity that Silent Hill later built upon for psychological effect, but it's important to remember just how effective a simple static shot can be to the human eye. So next time you find yourself looking down a long corridor in a video game, just remember that something is always watching. Hi guys, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please share your own thoughts in the comments below, and if you haven't done so already, do hit that little subscribe button, and also follow me on Facebook and Twitter if you want to keep up to date with everything that I'm working on. And if you can do so, and only if you want to do so, you can also pledge directly to the channel. That's what's going to keep the lights on in the future. Next week we're going to be talking about Saving Private Ryan. We're going to be doing another video on cinematography as well, so hopefully you look forward to that. Until next time, stay safe, and I'll see you very, very soon.